Hey everybody, what's up from Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. Today we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite sets, and really it's the very first set that I pursued in PSA graded format, and that's the first edition base set. The first item that I wanted to showcase was this first edition base set box. Now, this is not a sealed box, this is just an empty box, but the interesting thing is when I bought this box, it had a bunch of cards in it, including 4 holographic cards that I was able to send in and knock off some of the PSA 9s right away. There was an Alakazam, a Zapdos, a Nidoking, and the Chansey, and you'll see all 4 of those here in a moment. Along with that, this box came with about 200 commons and uncommons in it that were all in pretty solid condition. Since then, I've graded a bunch of those, and I kept the box for display purposes. Love the Charizard on it, just beautiful. And really nostalgic thing here. We've got Blastoise rocking the side, and on the back you get the barcode information, which I think is pretty fascinating. Now, the first edition base set was the one that kicked off Pokemon. It's sort of the rookie set of the Pokemon collectible hobby, and there's a lot to go back to and admire with these artworks. Now, as you guys will see, I've collected the holographic set in PSA 9, and this was actually the very first set that I pursued when I rejoined the Pokemon collecting hobby back in about 2010. Since then, I've had them framed and on display. It's a PSA 9 set, and recently I've taken them out of display and put them into storage, moved them into perfect fit sleeves rather than the larger ones. So it's a little bit sad to no longer have the shadow box on display, but it was really great being able to relive these cards and to share them with you today. So without further ado, let's take a look at the first edition PSA 9 base holo set. Getting into the holographic cards, the first one is Alakazam, and Alakazam is amazing. It's got the damage swap Pokemon power, which was highly playable at the time, and beautiful card. The holographic on a lot of the base sets isn't particularly notable, it's just the star pattern, and a lot of the backgrounds are somewhat one-dimensional, but I've always loved this card. This was one of the ones that came out of that box, so that was really fortunate. All right, taking a quick look at the data for Alakazam, population of 393 in PSA 9. You can see the volatility I was talking about earlier as prices spiked in the $7,000 to $8,000 range right during the Logan Paul hype and coming back down. And this is where maybe there's that reversal opportunity, that opportunity to buy low. I could be mistaken about that, but considering how rare these cards are and how historical they are, that just seems like something that's likely to happen in the long term for me. Next up, we have Blastoise, the King Turtle himself. And I know Blastoise is a lot of people's favorites. I know Scott, SM Pratt, he always chose Squirtle. He's always talking about how Blastoise is the real treasure of base set. And it's hard to disagree. So I actually decided to collect 2 of each of the starters. So I do have 2 Blastoise cards, and they're both PSA 9s, roughly the same condition. Just one of those cards I felt like was a good investment piece since first edition base set is so iconic, and that's proven to be a good decision so far. Prices reaching up to $20,000, coming back down to roughly $7,000 to $8,000. So with that type of decrease, the question is, will it be sustainable? Are prices going to continue dropping? Will we see that reversal? I can't tell for sure. It's really difficult to predict the market right now. Next, we have the Chansey. Chansey, another card that was highly playable when Pokemon was first released. High hit points, it's a basic Pokemon. Could do 80 damage. Chansey would damage itself, but for most Pokemon, that's going to be a one-shot knockout. And with a couple double colorless energies, you could have that powered up in no time. The back on this one is really clean. This one also came from that first edition base box purchase that I showed you earlier. I think like anybody, first edition Charizard was the card to have as a kid, and I always wanted one, and I was unable to acquire one as a child, so once I got older, graduated from college, had some discretionary income, that's really one of the first cards that I went for, and I was lucky enough to pick up several of them over the years. And this is the very first Charizard that I graded in PSA 9. This one I purchased for $200 raw, which was the going rate at the time, and I was fortunate enough that it was beautiful condition. It's got the thick stamp, And I sent this one in, and it got the 9, as it deserved. There was maybe a slight outside chance for a 10, but there is one little dot of edge wear up at the top, and it's a slight off-centering issue, but this is a beautiful, beautiful copy of Charizard. I do have a second one of Charizard as well. This one is the thin stamp. This one I picked up a little bit later, and this was part of a complete collection of first edition base set that I purchased. And naturally, I sent all the holographic cards in for grading. Kept some of them. Some of them I sold over the years. But this one, too, is also in really good condition. There is the dot of edge wear up in the corner. You're going to get that sometimes with PSA 9s. Generally not so much with PSA 10s. And I think the 9 was the right grade here. Everybody's favorite, Charizard, with a population of 654. And this I find interesting, but not particularly surprising. And that's that the volatility that we've seen with some of these other cards isn't affecting Charizard nearly as much. While there certainly has been some level of retrace, going from a $55,000 all-time high to settling in at about $45,000 to $50,000, with a few sales lower, isn't that massive of a retrace. And I think that's what we're going to see moving forward, is that there's going to be more stability in certain high-value, high-end cards, like Charizard, just given its iconic status and its high demand, is I think that's going to make it less susceptible to those major price changes. Next up, we have Clefairy. And Clefairy's definitely one of the underrated cards in base set. And I know a lot of people found it strange that the unevolved form would get a holographic card. Like, why not Clefable? And really, we had to wait until Jungle set before Clefable was released. I will say that this copy is a pretty weak 9, if I'm being honest. You probably can't see it on the camera. There's also a little bit of edge wear down in the corner. And then a dot up in the top right corner as well. So, I don't know. It's still a great card, and I don't have any problems with it personally. But those people that are out there looking for the strongest candidates, this one I would say is one of the weaker ones in my set. I think Gyarados is one of the cards that gets underrated in the base set. I mean, there's so many great cards there that we look to Blastoise and to Charizard and Venusaur, and sometimes Mewtwo comes up. But Gyarados is a really great looking card. Gyarados is the second dragon in this set, and probably the least favorite of the two, which isn't really saying much because Gyarados is still a heavy hitter, a fan favorite. And how can you not like Gyarados? The artwork on this is beautiful. Gyarados evolving from Magikarp, going from non-intimidating at all to this giant dragon of death. So I think that's something we can all appreciate. Next up is Hitmonchan, another card that was highly playable. And this one is tough to grade for a few different reasons. One is the holofoil is really susceptible to scratching. And then just by number, cards number 1, Alakazam, 4, which is Charizard, and 7, which is Hitmonchan, were all placed on the inside of the binder in a standard 9-card pocket 3-ring binder. Those ones that are on the side pockets near the binder rings, very susceptible to getting dents over time, little pressure dents. It's really unfortunate because those are some of the best cards, like Alakazam, Charizard. Maybe not so much Hitmonchan, but it's definitely one of the lower population cards, especially in PSA 10. We can't forget about Machamp, and although every Machamp is first edition, there is a first edition shadowless variant and a first edition shadowed variant. In order to get Machamp, you had to buy one of the starter decks. You guys probably can't see this real well, but I have a couple Machamps that are still sealed in the original packaging. They were issued in the starter sets, and so these are in pretty mint condition. However, even within the packaging, you're not guaranteed 10s, and due to the centering on these and some of the factory-issued print lines, I can tell that these are most likely 9s, so deciding whether or not to break them out of those seals and send them in for grading might actually be more detrimental than helpful to their value. So for now, these are just going to stick in the collection as they are. It's not a card you can get from a booster pack, but if you're looking to complete the set, it is one of the ones that you need. Next up is Magneton. Now, Magneton probably has more holographic cards printed by Wizards of the Coast than like any other card in existence. It's kind of weird. There's one in Fossil, there was one in Team Rocket, there was one in Gym Heroes, one in Neo Revelation, So many Magnetons. And it's not a Pokemon that a lot of people look to as a personal favorite. And within the base set, it's probably one of the ones that gets overlooked the most. Magneton with a population of 386. And this is actually one of the least expensive cards in the set, if not the least expensive. Looking at the prices, just crossing over $1,000 here with several different sales. So, not one of the most popular ones, and that's shown with people's pocketbook. Next up, we have Mewtwo. This is one of the personal fan favorites out there. Mewtwo is a very iconic Pokemon within the franchise. You think back to the Game Boy games, you'd save the Master Ball to try to catch Mewtwo. It was the most powerful Pokemon, arguably, in the first 151. Really gorgeous card. Very standard attack pose here. I was mentioning this earlier, but a lot of the backgrounds are pretty subtle, pretty plain. And this one just has like a little like swirling of different colors, but that's really it. Nothing overly fancy. This one does have a little edge wear up at the top, so again, I wouldn't describe this one as the strongest example of a PSA 9. Really, that's the only flaw, though, is just that dot of edge wear up at the top. I know this might be another slightly unpopular opinion, but Nidoking is one of my favorite cards from the set. It's one that I think is really amazing. The artwork is beautiful, and even the holographic pattern pops a little bit more than a lot of the other cards. This one also came from that box I was talking about earlier, and what I love about Nidoking is the attack pose here. He's got his hand, his claw, whatever you want to call it, pressed out towards the viewer, and Nidoking was always one of my favorite Pokemon, personally. Next up is Ninetales, and Ninetales was one of those cards you could find in a theme deck, in the Brushfire theme deck more specifically, but not the first edition variant. You can only get this from first edition booster packs. And once again, this is one that I would describe as a weaker 9. We've got a little dot of edge wear up in the top corner. There's a little bit of edge wear in both the bottom corners. To me, I would probably grade this an 8. I tend to grade more strictly than PSA when I'm pre-grading my cards before I send them. But this isn't a card that I would expect a 9 on. Poliwrath. Now, Poliwrath has not gotten a lot of love from people, particularly Logan Paul. You know what I'm talking about if you watch the opening. Poliwrath is a Stage 2 evolution, one of the water Pokemon. There's actually 3 different water evolution Pokemon within this base set holographic series. You get Poliwrath, Gyarados, and Blastoise. And so I think that's a pretty good lineup when you have all 3 of those together. Don't look too closely at his belly. You'll get hypnotized. I'm not really sure why that's on there. Like, that would make more sense to me for a psychic Pokemon, but, you know, with Poliwrath, why not? I mean, it makes sense with Poliwhirl, I guess. I actually did an interview with Pokemon Radar recently, and he was a really gracious host, and we talked about how I got started in Pokemon. And Raichu was actually the first card that I ever got in my collection. Now, it was just a shadowless version. It wasn't the first edition version, but that was always a card that I treasured as well, being the first card in my collection. Now, obviously, Pikachu is the mascot of the Pokemon franchise, so Raichu is going to have a bit more fan favoritism. But how can you not like this card? Raichu was my very first holographic card. I got a shadowless version back when I was just a kid. Cost me $15, and my parents weren't super happy that I spent that kind of money on a piece of cardboard. Wonder what they think now. We won't get into that, though. But the first edition one is definitely one that I was eager to add to the collection. And I was fortunate enough to do that relatively early in the collecting of this set. So just like with Blastoise, I do have 2 Venusaurs as well. One of them is a thick stamp, one of them is a thin stamp, and there's a very subtle difference between the two. So it is kind of cool to have one of each. Unfortunately, I don't have doubles of every single card in the base set, but I did want to get 2 of each of the starters for that reason. I do really like the artwork on Venusaur. Venusaur is like this prehistoric dinosaur-looking Pokemon, and so I think being the least favorite for most people out of the 3 starters is a bit unfair and a bit disingenuous because it really is a cool artwork. At the same time, I understand why it's hard to compete with Charizard and Blastoise. There's a reason why they're the big 3. All 3 of them are pretty amazing. The last of the 3 starters, Venusaur, with a population just a hair under 500 at 499, and probably no card shows the rapid rise in growth and then subsequent retrace better as prices jumped from $3,000 all the way up to $12,000 before coming back down to the $4,000 and $5,000 range. So I don't know what to make out of that, but that's the kind of volatility we're seeing with base set. Now, I could be entirely wrong about this because the market hasn't been the most predictable lately, but as I'm looking back to base set, it's an iconic set. It's the very first set that introduced Pokemon cards to the world. It's an extremely limited supply, and there's really nothing out there anymore that's ungraded. I mean, sure, you might have a few copies coming in here and there, but most of the mint supply is already gone. And so to see prices where they're currently at doesn't seem long-term sustainable to me. So take that for what you will. It's not financial advice. It's just a suspicion that I have that these cards are going to be what people look back to 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when they want to acquire those most valuable, most well-known cards from their past. They have the history, they have the condition, they have the limited supply. To me, those are all really good factors working in their favor. And to wrap up the set, Pokemon made an interesting choice of releasing just one of the 3 legendary birds. And that's a decision I never really understood because you don't get the other 2 until Fossil, and that's actually has its own Zapdos there, so there's 2 Zapdoses in the first few sets, but only 1 Articuno and 1 Moltres. So that never really made a ton of sense to me. Zapdos is still a really cool card. I actually opened one of these out of a booster pack as a kid and received a shadowless Zapdos. I'm pretty sure it was shadowless. There was a Wizards of the Coast store at Mall of America in Bloomington, Minnesota, and we had gone out there as part of a family trip. We had relatives in from California, and my mom let my brother and I pick out 2 packs each, and I was fortunate enough to pull a Zapdos. It was one of those great memories in my childhood, and so Zapdos, one that I have strong feelings on. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this one. That was the first edition PSA 9 base holographic set. This was the very first set of PSA cards that ushered me into the hobby. It kind of sparked an interest in collecting all of the Wizards of the Coast holos, and although I've made a lot of progress on that goal over the years, the goal's never finished. That's one of the great things about this hobby, is there's always something new to attain, always new uncharted territory to explore, and you get to do it while meeting new people and having experiences as a collector. So I would highly encourage you guys to continue working on your collections, continue pursuing those goals, and you never know what's going to happen. The unpredictability is a great way to live in the moment. I'm Pokemon Classics, reminding you guys that the classics never go out of style. We'll see you with the next video. Take care, everyone.